It's now my pleasure to introduce our guest for today, Julia Beabout. Julia is the CEO and creative director of Novaby, an augmented reality studio based in Seattle. She is also the chair of the Seattle Downtown Community Council and co-founder of the Tech in the Tenderloin, a San Francisco-based nonprofit connecting low-opportunity youth with high-opportunity tech through fun events and educational activities. It's great to have you here, Julia. I'm so excited to learn more about Novaby.
Thank you. Great. All right. Well, I will switch over here. Let's see. Replace current share. That looks right. Oh, sorry. There we go. Well, thank you for that, Nick. I'm excited to be here. Nick, Sydney, and Donna, thank you for having us today. And as Nick said, I'm wearing a few hats today. I'm going to be speaking first from my Novaby hat, which we are an augmented reality studio specializing in placemaking, activations, and tours. And we got our start, going on 10 years ago in San Francisco. That's the reason a few of my hats have San Francisco in them as well. But before we jump in, I really want to acknowledge that while I'm the one here talking today, I am just one of an amazing team. I always say it takes a village to create AR. And so I just want to acknowledge the many amazing artists, developers, designers on our team that really make all of this happen. I feel like I get to do the fun part in terms of the creative direction and do a lot of the community engagement. So, but I'm also here, as Nick said, wearing a couple different hats, some of which I will touch on later. One of those is the chair of the Downtown Community Council, which we used the inCitu platform for, which was such a fantastic experience and match for that project. And then the other is the Tech in the Tenderloin hat, which a couple of our projects have been done jointly with those. So first of all, I thought we'd talk a little bit about what placemaking is, at least from our perspective, because it is kind of a buzzy term over the last, 5 to 10 years. And so for us, when we talk about placemaking, we are talking about an evidence-based co-design practice or methodology that's rooted in the urbanism of Jane Jacobs and the public art realm. Within this paradigm, a place is defined as a space that has meaning attached to it by people. And that meaning is usually rooted in history or shared experiences that have occurred in that space. And so as a result of this, it tends to engage a lot in collective memory, which is something I am passionate about and have a background in as well. So closely aligns with memory and identity in particular. So there's kind of three main pillars of placemaking or goals. One is to connect people with their surroundings, so the spaces and places around them, and then to connect people with each other through those and in those spaces, particularly through, as I mentioned, a co-design process, meaning engaging them in creating these or transforming spaces into places. And then third, a final and really important one is actually generating joy in these places. So the anthropology and evidence shows that when we're happy, we tend to be better behaved and we spend more money and our sense of well-being is enhanced. And so that's one of the reasons placemaking has been getting an increased amount of attention. I would say particularly in the wake of COVID, is a lot of placemaking is going on right now, being conducted by cities and other stakeholders in cities because of these both economic and intangible benefits such as well-being and community building. So one of the reasons we particularly like mobile AR for placemaking, because placemaking doesn't have to include digital means. In fact, the vast majority of placemaking does not, but this is an area that we specialize in. One of the reasons or several of the reasons we really like mobile AR as opposed to other digital interventions is that it's very accessible. It's using obviously devices that most people already have in their pockets and are very comfortable and confident in using. Surprisingly, it really engages folks of all ages. So while we tend to think of mobile and AR as this kind of gaming thing that is targeting teens, particularly young teens, for these types of experiences, it really runs the whole gamut. In fact, we find that the average age of folks engaging with these kinds of experiences tend to be 35 and older. A lot of that is because the digital data we're capturing tends to be mom's phone or dad's phone, and they're sharing it with their kids or other adults, as you can see in these pictures. And then it's equally appealing to all genders, which is wonderful. And it's, again, very affordable, both in terms from the user, since it's using devices they already have, but also relative from a creation standpoint, relative to, say, virtual reality that's headset based, and you're creating a full digital environment. It's much more affordable to that. That's not to say it's always cheap, but it's much more affordable relative to those other formats. But the main reason we really feel mobile AR is a great match for placemaking and really enriches the experience is that it is widely shared both in the digital space and in the real world. So these kind of pictures you're seeing where you have, 2, 3, 4, even 5 people engaging in an experience together, sharing a phone, sidecarring is what we call it, is very common. And so that's something, if you're tracking metrics on your project, is something to keep in mind, that it's not a one-to-one digital engagement with the user, which is what we love. So with that, I do want to just make a distinction, or we make a distinction between placemaking and activations. They can all look pretty similar and do have similar outcomes, but it's the process that is different. So as an example here on the left, we have this activation, which we did engage very much with the client, but it was primarily kind of a one-way for their customers. The one in the upper right is a historic intervention that we were commissioned to do by a singular entity. And then finally, the placemaking, which we're talking about today. This is an experience, a tour, a history tour that we really co-designed in Richmond, Virginia, in the week of 2020 and George Floyd's death, that was designed extremely jointly, both in terms of design and production with the community. And so this digital monument that you see there was actually created by local local high school students there that we worked with. I'm going to touch on 3 placemaking projects just to kind of flesh out some of what we're talking about. Do a case study here on this project, past, present, future. So we'll do a little bit deeper dive here, and then we'll touch lightly on a couple other projects before transitioning to the AR James Walk, which I know is what we want to focus on here in particular. So past, present, future was really our first foray into let's take a very intentional approach to digital placemaking, mobile AR placemaking in particular. We created this for the Seattle Design Festival back in 2019. It's a block scale, as you can see, world scale intervention on this block. Just a bit of context and history. This was created for what's called the Third Pike Pine Block in downtown Seattle. Full disclosure, I live in the building you're seeing there, so it was very nice. We were like, we're just going to go outside and do this, damn it. And as much as I love my neighborhood, it is one of the most challenging neighborhoods. Some folks would say the most challenging neighborhood in San Francisco. So, excuse me, in Seattle. So all of the challenges that we, are facing in America are very visible and present on our block. And a lot of what we kind of noticed and our goals for the project were to reestablish meaning and significance to this block. This is actually a very historic block in Seattle, but most people aren't even aware of that. I was not aware of the historicity of the block and how influential the block has been in the cultural and philanthropic history of Seattle till I lived here. And then the block has become very disconnected from its surrounding blocks in every single way. And so we wanted to reestablish those connections. We wanted to engage the community. It's a block that's going through some rapid urban development and transformation that people were feeling they weren't being heard on. And then finally help build community. And the audience for this was primarily Seattle residents, and then certainly design festival goers. But this is also a big tourist area, so we knew we'd have kind of folks engaged that aren't familiar with Seattle. So our first approach in terms of establishing meaning and significance was to highlight the history on the block. And we did that in a couple of different ways. One is these AR murals that you see on what was one of Seattle's original dedicated movie theaters. Those are all interactive. And so when you tap on those, you get additional audiovisual content voiced by residents from the block that you can see on the right that explains to people what these various buildings were and who lived here. We also strategically recreated the marquee as an example. So that is a 3D element that people can walk around and see in 3 dimensions, which provides a big wow factor. And then finally, the banners, we recreated some of the kind of more positive historical events during the neighborhood's heyday back in the 1920s and 40s. Then for reconnecting the block to the surrounding area and Seattle's history at large, we are just about 2 blocks from the Pike Place Market. And so we, through storytelling, and again, these are interactive murals, we reconnected or made that association with these other very popular historic sites as well as tourist sites. And then we also highlighted again some individuals. The portrait you see on the right was a very active philanthropist in Seattle, and he lived in this building. So we tried to do it connect time, geography, people, and also commerce, which you see on the far left there. And then, as I mentioned, there was some urban development proposed for our block on the backside of the block. Since COVID, obviously things have been put on pause. This building hasn't been built, but it was and remains a very controversial development. And so we wanted to give people an opportunity to understand the size, scale, scope of the project in a way that was more meaningful to them and make comment. So we visualized this skyscraper that's at some point probably coming to the neighborhood. For this, we didn't have the feedback mechanism that inCitu has at the time. So this is before your platform. And so what we did is we gave people a physical way to provide comments. Some of that was through art that kids did. Others was just comment making and that kind of thing from adults. Oops. I think I went the wrong way there. And in terms of designing for community, obviously you saw digitally people were engaging in these experiences together, but we also created some real world group engagement opportunities, which falls into a little bit more of the traditional placemaking approach. So we had bubble making, balloons, we had sidewalk painting. And so that was a great way to connect it to the real world and also acts kind of daylights the event as well. So we got great feedback. I said this was really our first major foray into trying to make this into a placemaking intervention. 94% of the folks said this was a great way to learn about a new neighborhood. We did surveys, interviews, and all of that. But my favorite feedback that we got, which was from one of our volunteers, she said, I didn't realize this was an actual neighborhood. And that was like, that just made our day, because that's what we were trying to help people really understand, is that people live here. in spite of all the challenges that we see and people think of this as a commercial business district, it really is equally a neighborhood with many residential folks as well. So a couple other projects that highlight these, but in a slightly similar approaches, but in a slightly different way. This is the Tenderloin neighborhood of San Francisco, particularly the Turk and Hyde corner. Similar to the project we just talked about, you can see in the upper right, that's actually on a good day at the corner of Turk and Hyde. But again, all of the challenges that we are aware of in the United States right now are on full display in the Tenderloin, particularly on this corner. It was actually one of the most deadly and dangerous corners in San Francisco. There has been, since the top picture was, and since we started the project, a very intentional and well-designed intervention, physical real-world intervention on the corner that you can see in the bottom right corner. So there's now a park, these amazing murals. And then to this, we have now overlaid what we call the Live at the Black Hawk Project. So there used to be a historic world-renowned jazz club that sat on this corner from 1949 to 1963. And so what we did is we worked with local youth, such as the Boys and Girls Club, the Salvation Army, as well as adults and professional artists to recreate that a playful version, an artistic version of the Black Hawk Jazz Club, and place it on the corner of that site. You can see some of the artwork that the Boys and Girls Club created. So we were fortunate that the Black Hawk had these billboards on the outside that they used for advertising upcoming acts. So we repurposed those for storytelling. And so we worked with youth that live in the neighborhood to find a story, learn about their neighborhood, draw art, and create an interactive experience around those that's embedded in there. And then on the inside, we've commissioned professional artists to create artworks. So people can walk inside, as you can see. There's also a soundtrack that the local jazz youth ensemble created. You can see a few more of those artworks in the upper right-hand corner there. And this has become kind of a ongoing project where we're now going through the 4th iteration of refreshing the billboards, working with local youth, and then also working with professional artists. So it becomes kind of like a living digital art gallery. And then finally, again, just touch on this real quick. This is a few years later in 2022, we were commissioned to work with the neighborhood on Capitol Hill to create the AIDS Memorial Pathway. Again, incredibly, such an honor to be part of this project. So much history around the LGBTQ plus community occurred in this location, and the location was being completely redeveloped. Amazing plaza, but you can imagine that's emotional for folks, feeling they've lost some of the places they loved and went through this horrific epidemic, particularly during the 80s and 90s. But I think it's a really great testimony of a combination of physical and digital placemaking working hand in hand together. And to create a new space that is meaningful, useful, and beautiful for everybody, and a real asset to the neighborhood. So again, kind of using this AR mural approach, these are all stories that we worked with the community to create, and local historians, all voiced by the LGBTQ plus community. The artworks have kind of an explanation or expansion of them through digital overlays. For this one, as an example, the X is one of the most amazing pieces of artwork I've ever seen, but it's very esoteric in terms of it has many layers of meaning. And so we were able to insert a video that the artist created behind that. and to kind of explicate artwork for folks. And then one of our favorite things that we've ever done is we were commissioned to create a digital memorial, again, in partnership with the community. So this is what we call the names tree. It is an artful recreation of a 100-year-old tree that sits across the street and been kind of a witness and sentinel to everything that's happened here. And unfortunately, it is on its way out of this world because it's so old. But we recreated that, preserved it, and then it sends up kind of these balls of light. And with each ball of light, a name of someone we've lost to AIDS in Seattle is read by somebody in the community. I should say, not just Seattle, in the state of Washington, which we've lost well over 8,000 folks to AIDS epidemic. So from there, all of this is to say, has informed what we did with the Downtown Community Council. And Nick, keep me honest on time here. I'm not sure. I get passionate about this and lose
Yeah,
track.
we're at 25. I want to leave some questions, maybe 15, 20 more minutes even is fine. Yeah.
Okay, great. I can move through this pretty quickly. So
I would like to hear about the Jane's Walk, definitely.
exactly. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to go on so long. So
No, it's fine.
all of this informed and positioned us well through the Downtown Community Council to create the the Seattle's first AR Jane's Walk. And so the main goals of this project really were to highlight some major infrastructure and building that were occurring in the downtown neighborhood that people would want to be informed about. They're all informed by rapidly changing legislation on these things. So it's an educational opportunity, but also to get their input on how these might reshape their neighborhood and their feedback. So the biggest of these was what we call the LID I-5 project, similar projects going on around the country. This was literally the largest installation we've ever done and the most challenging. And the inCitu platform, I would say, was the only platform that could make this work. So you can see kind of here's where it's going and what it currently looks like today, and some 2D renderings, which is the traditional format the public is engaged in. And so we said, hey, we can represent these potential opportunities for over the lid here in AR, and we provided a guided tour that engaged people in person, which you can see. So those are two options for creating a park on top of the highway. One of the other things that's been happening is this design review and exceptions that are being made in terms of community engagement. And so we were informing people about that and how to stay involved and make sure their voice gets heard in the face of this changing legislation. So this was a very large skyscraper that was being potentially be installed, and educating them on how to have their voice heard. This was also a very large installation revision, and again, probably the second hardest one I've ever done. Again, so the inCitu platform was fantastic for this. Basically, there's some renovations happening at the core park plaza in downtown Seattle. The most challenging thing here was actually they're removing beloved elements. These two large stone structures here and the waterfall you see there, which AR is great for adding, not always is great for removing. So Nick and I strategized on how to make that happen. And so we were able to kind of achieve that. You can see on the right how taking this 2D rendering on the left and turning this into a 3D AR experience really kind of helps people understand what this would look and feel like in the space. Obviously, they can walk around. And then finally, there's been a big change at the state level on landmark buildings and what's allowed and not allowed with those. So on the left, you can see this very historic. It's not necessarily architecturally beautiful or anything like that, but it has a lot of significance to people in the community. And it's also one of the only buildings left that from around the time of Seattle's fire. It's also, as you can see from the background, at a very important and strategic location, the Pike Place Market, all of which is absolutely protected. And so the owner of this building wants to sell the building to a developer, and they want to create a 14-story, tear it down and create a 14-story hotel. Again, we all need, people aren't against development, but the people wanted better ways to engage on this project and at least provide their input. So I think, and then finally, we wanted to make sure people have a little bit of fun while this is going on. So we interspersed some digital public art projects along the way, also to kind of show the potential of AR. So you can see kind of an art intervention on the left here. That was actually a reprisal of something that this artist did in Times Square in New York. And then you can see we kind of moved up and reprised our Kraken here, as well as so a leaping orca, which is kind of aligned with an intervention, an undersea intervention, physical real world one that's going to be happening there. And then finally, I'll just end with, we couldn't believe it. We totally lucked out. This here is Jane Jacobs' grandniece. So we discovered about halfway through the tour, she raised her hand. She's like, "I'm Jane
No
Jacobs'
way.
grandniece." And we're like, "What?" So we had a brush with fame. She apparently lives in West Seattle, and so we had to do a selfie with her.
Wait, who is it, Julia? On the
The
left
one
there?
in my screen, it's on the left. She has the pink kind of t-shirt
Oh
on.
my gosh. I
Yeah,
almost see
I
them.
know.
Those
So
are
it's like
nuts.
brush with fame.
That's
Yeah,
so cool.
so there, I'm sorry I ran over a little bit. So happy to take any questions and comments.
My gosh, Julie, thank you so much. That was just very interesting. I had some of those projects I'd seen for the first time, and I remember looking at that jazz venue when we were testing out inCitu. And usually our models, because their construction sites don't have interiors, but that one, since you
Ah,
fleshed out the whole interior, I put it on a parking lot near my house, and I walked inside, and it was so
oh,
cool to see
oh,
that.
good. I'm glad. Yeah. Yeah, it's fun.
Um,
People like that to be able to walk inside. Yeah.
yeah, it's so amazing. So I've got a few questions for you, but I want to offer
Yeah.
anyone in the chat first the opportunity to ask any questions you have for Julia. Feel free to type them in, and we'll um, get to them in order they're asked. My first question for you, Julia, was more about your workflow with
Mhm.
Novaby and everything around these AR activations, how you get started, and especially how you collaborate with people in the community. You mentioned a sort of concept when we were talking earlier called imagined environments. And I wonder
Mhm.
if you could speak to that a little bit and then share your workflow with us.
Yeah. So especially like around that kind is kind of rooted in collective memory theory and practice. And so, we tend to, especially those of us, I have architectural engineering background, and many folks I know come from that background. We do tend to think of neighborhoods as our physical environment, but really it's what's in our head, and that's certainly the three-dimensional imagination of it, but it's really the meaning, our lives that we overlay onto that. And so really that's kind of what we try to get into very much through our process. So I'll actually use that as a segue to our workflow. So I've learned kind of the hard way. It's always story, 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 like first, foremost. And it's really about discovering what these spaces mean to folks and potentially the different layers of stories. I think there's a tendency in AR, which and it has great advantage that you can use it to tell multiple stories at any given location. But what I encourage people to do is try to work with the community to bring those stories, if possible, into a common collective story. Don't neglect the work of community building. It's that working together to find a story or narrative, meaning in the space, joint meaning making that builds the community and that can transcend a lot, I think, of the issues that we're having now in terms of our rhetoric. From there, we then start doing visual concept. Those frequently overlap, and it's always an iterative process. But so story first, then visual concept, then we start prototyping. That's the other thing we've learned, had to learn repeatedly, and we still do every time. Like whatever it is, get it in AR as fast as you can. Don't worry about it looking perfect, even if it's just a block, because a lot of what we think will be enriching and interactive for people, it can fall flat. And so you can spend a lot of time and effort really creating some really cool visual effects, interactions, all of that that people may or may not do or might not have the same impact for them as it does for you. So and then obviously then you're moving into production at that time and doing your final assets and development. So
That concept actually inspired a feature that we now have developed since we started the Changelog project with Julia, where we were talking about this idea that you want to get models into AR as soon as possible to see how they look even before they're done and even share them early. And we have a tool in inCitu called Edit Mode, which lets you adjust the models on location. And Julia was saying, I would like to be able to adjust the primitive model and then replace it with the detailed model and still have the same settings that I made with the edit mode carry through. And we thought that seems a very natural workflow. So we just launched that a few weeks ago. So now you're able to start with a blank cube if you want, and then update it later after you positioned it on site. So that was really, really glad we were able to do that. So
yeah,
we have a
that's
question.
I have a great great feature for sure. Yeah.
Especially for those lids and those really large models, that's where
Yeah.
it
As
comes on.
a
And we're working on some more improvements too that I'll share later with the using the edit mode, better increments. So coming soon. Have a question from Paul in the chat from Virtual America. So in your prototyping phase, are you doing user testing, rapid prototyping? What would you call that?
what was the last part? Rapid
User
what?
testing or versus rapid prototyping, or what's the user testing process like?
Yeah, so I would say the initial stage um, for us is just getting something in there that is, like I said, rough shape, whatever. And a lot of that is kind of just what you were talking about is it's often hard to really, what we're dealing with is not does the model actually fit on there. We're dealing with human perception. And I, again, pains my architectural engineering heart to say that, but it's human perception. And so the models, even though they're the right size, the right position, frequently won't look right. And so it's important to kind of like get that, flesh that out at the front. And that's really a technical issue. And so definitely doing a lot of rapid prototyping, or there might be something you didn't notice when you did your site visit, like, oh, there's something there that's going to interfere with the immersive effect. And that would be kind of more the technical side. The user testing, I would say, initially it's usually with the whatever that stakeholder group is that we're working very closely with and co-designing with. We would engage them, depending on the scope, scale, and excuse me, the scope, schedule, and scale of the budget and budget of the project. We may or may not engage in what is more of a traditional user testing, which is more for like websites and stuff like that. So that the scale, where you kind of like pull together a dedicated user group that knows nothing about the project. Most of our projects don't have that amount of time or kind of budget to do something like that. And so what we focus more on is working with that stakeholder group. Usually that is a reasonably broad and a large group to do that kind of work, and then getting it out there and getting like making it available for the public and then adapting as we go. No project's ever done,
I love
I'll put it
the
that
with the
way.
jazz venue you mentioned, going back later, even after you've launched it,
Yeah,
and bringing it back with successive years, updating the art inside, and that is also possible on inCitu, by the way, without changing your QR code and signage. It's the same
right.
information. But I think that's really cool idea to build community like after the project is done, post occupancy, so to speak.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So Sydney has a question. I'm really interested to hear more about how you think about engagement success. You mentioned that one of the benefits of AR is that it's not a one-to-one person digital interaction. What are the types of metrics you use to measure how impactful a project has been? Is that conversation, word clouds, impact of some sort?
Sure. That's a really good question. I usually ask that to our stakeholders, whoever our co-creator kind of, you could say client group is, stakeholder group is, what is it? I really try to get them to focus on the goals and what would they consider to be success, right? What does success look like to them? So pretty traditional, approach that way. One thing, just as a little bit of sidebar there, we find for most people, most stakeholder groups, clients, whatever we work with, it's their or whoever we work with is their first time using AR. And so they tend to make the mistake at this point of thinking that AR is super novel and cool, and that will be enough to attract people to do their experience. And I'm like, no, that like at this point, I nicely say no. At this point, I told them like we can pretty much do anything technically, artistically in AR. There's not a lot of limitations at this point. um, that's only half the problem we're trying to solve. The other half is user engagement, right? And that takes work just like any other event or project you'd be doing, right? Usually through social media is the best way, all of that. So the reason I bring that up is that because of that, and because engagement frequently, people discover the experiences frequently through social media, their mindsets are very much about traditional social media metrics, right? And so it's how many engagements do you have? How many views do you have? All of, those kinds of things, which we can provide them. But we have a guide we give folks at this point of how best to do it. And, we can coach them through it a little bit. But we do let them know that this is different, right? So in contrast to somebody sitting on their phone, scrolling, whatever, where it's 99% of the time, one user to one view or engagement, however you want to track it. Um, this is different, and we probably want it to be different. And so doing field observation is really important to see what is a good multiplier to apply to your number of views, number of engagement. And so through the multiple experiences that we've seen, like I said, I would say 2.5 is conservative, meaning like it's probably more like 3, sometimes even 4 and 5 people. But whenever you do your experience, particularly whenever you launch your experience, it's good to do field observation to see how people are engaging it, to kind of learn what that multiplier should be, because that can obviously greatly amplify the numbers, right? Which is what they're really, from a social media perspective, they're after, right? And then the other thing is, I do think qualitative feedback is helpful, right? Like how meaningful is this to people, and is quantity really our only gauge here, right? And if 1,000 people can engage with something, but if they're not remembering it, or it's not impacting, most of the time we're trying to change hearts and minds here and educate. If they're not learning or feeling what we want them to, then it's still not successful. So, the surveys can get better, or better for that type of information. I even think like direct feedback sessions, focus groups or whatever, depending on your time and all of those things. So, yeah.
That's a really great point about the multiplier. We do track scans, of course, by device, but a lot of
Right.
times people are looking as a group. So yeah, that's very thoughtful. And on the subject of qualitative feedback, I wonder if I could ask more about what is the design review process? And also in
Oh,
Seattle, which we all think of Seattle as a place that has amazingly strong local and neighborhood culture. And that
oh,
is both a blessing, and then for some planners, it's just a bane of frustration because it ties up all these projects at the end of the process, and it makes
well,
it so
that's what they
hard to build housing, right? So what I'd like to ask you is why does public participation and sort of qualitative engagement, does it have to equal inefficiency in your mind? What is the types of design, if you could design your ideal design review process,
Mm.
what parts of the process would it happen, and what are the possibilities for being able to use XR to help people say more than yes or no on something, for example?
Yeah, really, really good, thoughtful question. So we're actually trying to work on that and force that question right now is what does an ideal design review process look like? For those that are maybe not familiar with the design review process, it's pretty much something every city in the United States, particularly major city, has in the country. And particularly in kind of urban areas like we have, where if a building that is scheduled to be built is over a certain size and scale, it has to go through what's called the design review process, which means they have to present multiple times to a board of architects and their peers, developers, all of that. And that's a government board, and they're really tasked with maintaining, like, hey, can we get some sort of uniformity here in our city, right? Because otherwise it would just be all over the map, which is understandable. That's their prime. That's why they started back in the 70s, but it's become a lot more nitpicky, which doesn't work for anybody. And then the other thing that's been happening is because housing is such a challenge for us and so many other cities, there's been a lot of exceptions carved out, and they sound very logical on the first, but logical at first, but it has led to some real mistakes. And when you're in a downtown area, that's why, what we say advocate is like, look, these are 100-year long, 200-year long mistakes if you make them because of the size, scope, and materials that are used on high rises and whatnot. So it actually behooves us to be more thoughtful, not less thoughtful about what we're doing. So that said, the current design review process, everybody agrees, is broken, does not work. It's too complicated. A lot of that complication is actually on the permitting side, not on the community engagement side. But we're advocating, and we seem to be headed in that, really, if you bring the community engagement requirement much earlier in the process, so during concept, it accomplishes a couple things. It reduces the risk for the developer because time is money for them and risk for their loans. So reduces the risk. It creates a more meaningful timing for community engagement, and it actually um, provides better intelligence, more actionable intelligence from the community, I would say. So if you've already, where it usually happens now is a building will be pretty much designed, not maybe construction documents, but well into design development. And that's really when they start to engage the community. But at that point, there's already a lot of time and money invested by the design professionals and the development. And like, oh, like you start getting the community being like, well, our alley is already super, super crowded every day. Like, how are you going to get, in this case, all of these cars in there? Which is a really important point. It's not to say the transportation departments aren't thinking about that, but again, that kind of gets to this difference between quantitative and qualitative input. So I don't know if that was very clear, but
No, that really resonates, and we've also got some of
Sure.
Paul from Charleston in the chat, and they've got a very in-depth historic review process down
Oh,
there.
I'm sure.
I, you know,
Yeah.
it happens all the time. I think I'll have friends from where I live that suddenly notice some change that has been proposed, and they'll find the comprehensive parent plan from like 5 years ago, and they'll say, "Did you know about this?" I'm like, "Yeah, it was 5 years ago they made a comprehensive plan." And I think what that's like when those plans or the rezonings are created is the real opportunity for like super in-depth feedback. But because maybe it's so abstract or there's not something specific at stake, it's
Yeah.
challenging to engage people at that step. And I wonder if you think that's where maybe XR could help make some of those comprehensive plan processes more tangible and putting scenarios and hypothetical things actually on the street. Um, yeah.
It's a really good question. We're actually right now in Seattle, we go through our comprehensive plan every, I think, 10 years. And this happens to be one of those years. So not only are we going through our comprehensive plan, now we're also getting these changes from design review, which they're analogous but separate processes. When I find, yes, I do think it could be, definitely XR could have a role in the comprehensive plan, and maybe it varies a bit on the city and what that entails. But um, for Seattle, so for it's just hard to make zoning really sexy and like have people want to talk about it, but it's incredibly important. Um, and so and the comprehensive plan, like in Seattle's case, is huge. Like it's literally the whole region, so it's very diffuse. And so, yes, I do think on some of the more, again, in my opinion, some of the denser neighborhoods, particularly the urban neighborhoods, um, I think it could play a bigger role there. And as I said, like those are neighborhoods that if you make a mistake, as opposed to a green field, it's harder, it has a bigger impact and it's harder to correct. And yeah, so yes, I think the short answer is yes. I think there's room and space there for that. So
Amazing. So we are at 10 minutes. I'm going to give everyone an opportunity to ask any more questions you have. And if you thought of anything, Julia, one of the things I was curious if you have any calls to action or things that you'd like to let the viewers know about that you're doing.
yeah, so I think the thing that we've learned, we've been doing this um, for quite a while now. So before web-based AR was really even a thing, like, or at least not viable. The technology has really advanced a lot over the roughly 10 years that we've been doing this. Certainly made it much easier, much faster, affordable to use. And I would say web and app clips, that's to me one of the things I like about the inCitu platform is that it's an app clip-based platform, so it basically turns it into a web-based experience. So there's a lot of flexibility in that. And so for these kind of location-based world scale experiences where people, particularly you're to some degree depending on walk by traffic for engagement, the ability to not have to download a dedicated app to do that, it just reduces the friction and increases the likelihood that people would engage and that you can get meaningful feedback on whether it's a urban redesign project or meaningful engagement with some sort of tour or historical project. Yeah, so that's been a huge breakthrough and that we're very excited about. It has a secondary advantage that we've learned more through our kind of tours, placemaking types of projects is spatial engines are great for the 3D content. They are not great for creating a UI, 2D UI. And so, up until web and some of these other competing platforms, not competing, but other app-based platforms, Unity was really the only option. And so most of our work early on was being done in Unity, and we were having to make dedicated apps. And like I say, Unity is great for as a spatial engine and creating for 3D content. It is not fun to create a 2D UI in that. So creating, having your 3D content be able to be web-based or app clip-based allows then you to either integrate with existing 2D UIs that maybe the client has an app or other platforms that are better suited for that. And then obviously you're just pasting a link, which is ideal. So kind of get the best of both worlds and a lot more flexibility that way. And then the other thing is, again, to do the kind of content at this scale, you need a very robust visual positioning system. And there's really, there used to be more viable options. We've actually kind of had a culling of them in the last year or two. And yeah, so, and that can get very platform specific. So depending, what platform is right for you. A lot of them have kind of a scanning potential, but it's really more object scanning based, meaning around a statue or something like that. So to do obviously the LID I5 project, the Westlake project, you need world scale, which basically you're into a Google VPS or cesium, something like that.
Yeah, we use world
use
scale
cesium, so,
positioning for inCitu.
yeah.
Because of speed, it's so quick to set up projects, and it's improving so much now. There was a lot of presentations at Esri conference we went to about AI and how that's going to affect the accuracy in the next 5 years. And then we also use it because we are trying to integrate directly with GIS data, and so someday to be able to see every single building permit in AR, not everyone can go out and do that one by one, and so that's sort
Yeah.
of where we're headed. But yeah, so we're almost at time. I just want to call out a couple more resources that we have: our survey, our documentation, so you can learn how to publish a project with inCitu. And then we have a proposal for a South by Southwest panel featuring some more of our community members, and we'd love your support on that. It's about climate communication with immersive media. And one more freebie, since you joined us, I want to share with you is that we have a guide. And as Julia was saying, augmented reality is great, but it will not bring people to the street corner alone. And people are, really attracted by sunlight, water, food, and of course, existing community events. You can learn about all of that stuff and how to integrate augmented reality into community programming from our clients' experience directly through this guide that we created. So give that a check. And yeah, we would really appreciate your feedback, and hope to keep in touch. If you haven't tried inCitu yet, you can schedule an intro with us anytime, and I will walk you through your first project. So thanks again for joining us. Thank you so much, Julia, for being our guest this week, and it was so fun to hear about your work. We will see you all next time, and continue to do these webinars. I can't wait to find out who our next guest will be. Have a great weekend, everybody, and keep in touch.
Thank you, everybody. Appreciate you letting me share my work. So great.